I'd like to welcome everyone to our panel today. It's Change Doesn't Stop on Election Day. And what we're hoping to have is a discussion on how Americans can continue to use digital activism to transform their communities and laws after the very last ballot is cast today. So today is a very important day in America. It is election day today. If you haven't gone out yet and you're watching this right now and you haven't cast your vote yet, vote, because voting is, obviously the most important way to create change. But what we really want to chat about today is this is a unique election, and what can we do as of tomorrow to remain empowered and to empower other people in our communities and in our country. I'm Fatima, and I'm a member of the campaigns team at Change.org. And I'm just going to go around and have our panel introduce themselves and provide their pronouns. So I'm going to call on Professor Price, if you could let us know who you are.
Hi, thank you so much, Fatima, and all of Change.org for the invitation today. My name is Ricky Price. I'm a professor at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva, New York. I teach in American politics, and then my research is about the history of epidemics and health policy, and I look at institutions, science, and identities. And again, just thank you so much for the invitation.
It's a pleasure. We're so honored to have you here, especially with that incredible, unique set of expertise. And Charlie Stevens, could you let us know where you're coming from?
Thank you so much for the invitation, Fatima. So my name is Charlie Stevens, and I'm a sophomore at LSU in Baton Rouge, and I'm representing Louisiana Vote by Mail, which is an organization me and my friends founded over the summer after we got sent home due to the coronavirus.
Thank you, Charlie. We appreciate you being here. And Sylvia, mind telling us who you are and where you're joining us from?
Absolutely. My name is Sylvia Roll. I am a digital strategist leading the democracy desk at Change.org. My pronouns are she and her, and I am based in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much. I know these are obviously, it's weird for us to be so disparate, but I'm really grateful that we all get to connect and talk about something that impacts not just this whole country. I think in a lot of ways, this is a broader, much broader, and in some ways a global discussion. So I want to just kick us off with, I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but these elections are unique. This is a unique moment. And it's definitely driven support and interest and activism from all sorts of sectors, some of which have previously not even been that interested in engaging in politics and digital advocacy. I wanted to chat to you, Charlie. You and your friends, college students. I'm not sure if being involved in political activism and advocacy would have been something you might have been interested in before, but do you mind sharing with us, like, what was it about this particular moment and this particular election period that kind of inspired you guys to get involved?
Well, I think it was really a unique scenario. So March 13th, LSU sends us an email. Hey, you need to get out of your dorm. Like, we're locking up. You need to go home. And well, we're like, oh, okay. So the world, like we had heard of the coronavirus. It had been in the news, and it's like it had become a real thing in Baton Rouge. And we were like, okay. And so here comes this nationwide conversation of how are we going to run a national election in the middle of a pandemic? And I think the answer was for a lot of people, hey, we already have mail-in balloting in every state in this country. We already allow it for our more elderly populations in this country to vote by mail, and college students across the country can vote by mail. So I think we really just saw a vacuum in Louisiana where a lot of other groups across the country were talking about mail-in balloting, but it was just kind of like a vacuum in Louisiana. No one was talking about it. So we stepped up and we were like, we'll talk about it. We're gonna be like the flagship organization advocating for mail-in balloting. So we met with legislators across the state, started a petition, met with the governor's office, met with the Secretary of State, did a National College Voter Registration Week with the Saints and the Pelicans in New Orleans. That was every state, every college and university in the state was a part of that. So we're really proud of that. We got over 7,000 signatures on our petition. And I really think we did a lot to get to the million early votes that were cast in Louisiana. I like to think we had a small part in building that, and it couldn't have happened without Change.org.
Thank you. Thank you. And I mean, that's incredible work that you were able to achieve over this period of time. And I think like what's most interesting to me here is that you were able to do all of this incredibly impactful work with safely, you know, during the coronavirus. And this is one of the incredible pros during this pandemic of being able to engage in digital activism, which kind of leads me, I want to chat to you, Professor Price, specifically thinking about how this pandemic has actually changed the way campaigning, elections, you know, political power being kind of decentralized, distributed. How has this pandemic impacted that? You know, looking at how Charlie and his friends were able to achieve so much and all of that over the internet. Do you think that I mean, I guess I just wanted to find out how has this pandemic really impacted how campaigning efforts may have usually happened over an election year?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think some of the things that Charlie was talking about are pretty instructive here. One of the things that's unique about our political system is that states have broad purview over the running of their own elections, right? And so that's why you have such different rules from voter registration all the way up to which ballots will be accepted. And so if there's a theme from the Supreme Court rulings out of the last couple of weeks about whether or not ballots will be accepted past this date or that date, the only theme that I'm seeing come out of that is that the Supreme Court seems to be deferring at this point to the way the states are organizing them. Now, we'll see how that plays out over the next few weeks. But I think that's a big dynamic as to why the politicization of the harm reduction from coronavirus is now playing into our politics, is that the states, because of the 10th Amendment, have broad views not only for their elections, but the health and safety of their citizens. So the Constitution gives these states a really broad powers. So in states that are less aggressive about mask mandates or social distancing, you have different sets of priorities, right, that are playing out in the pandemic. And we know that, so just to sort of think of it that way, I think that's both why the pandemic is playing out in different ways in different states, but also why the election rules seem all over the place, and why I think Charlie, as he just expressed in his comments before me, why it seemed like, why is everybody talking about this and this isn't happening in Louisiana? And I think that really shows the power of local participation in politics, even if the conversation is federal or global.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, that actually leads me to thinking, you know, there are multiple states to be really thinking about and being cognizant of. Sylvia, can you like give us a little bit of insight into what are the states, you know, as today and tonight kind of rolls out, what are some of the states we should be paying attention to?
Well, that's a great question. So of course, we have, you know, the states that are perennial sort of battleground states that tend to vote for one party or another, kind of depending on which year and which candidacy is stronger. So at least here at Democracy Desk, we certainly have our eyes on, in terms of those battleground states, we certainly have our eyes on Florida tonight, as well as North Carolina, Georgia, Iowa. We have our eye on Pennsylvania also for different reasons. To go back to the professor's point, and one reason why there are a number of states that we are looking to sort of see how these results fall, it really does go back to the 10th Amendment, the dual sovereignty issues that the professor was raising. Many of these states, many of these states have current and active lawsuits governing whether or not a state could begin counting ballots by mail as soon as they received them, since more people were requesting ballots, again, because people want to, or many people wanted that option to be able to vote safely from home due to the ongoing COVID crisis. There were folks in other states that wanted to have access to voting at home, even if they weren't over a certain age. We saw court cases challenging the state of Texas in that particular regard. So because of this 10th Amendment, this dual sovereignty kind of issues, we see the potential for people's votes to not count the way they would normally count, basically due to lots of complications that have been introduced because we are running a very consequential election during a pandemic. We haven't done this in at least 100 years. I believe the 1920 presidential election was the last time we attempted to do a major national election during a pandemic. And we're still dealing with some of the attitudes, some of the resistances to having a more broad national approach. The same things we saw in 1920, we're seeing them again in 2020. But thankfully, we have technology, we have digital tools that make it easier for folks to continue to stay connected and to continue to register to vote online. Through Change.org, we were able to have almost 100,000 of our users check their voter registration status. There are people who would normally want to, knock on doors to ask people to vote. But because of this year, because of social distancing, we partnered with organizations that made it possible for people to write letters to voters in their communities and into swing states. So we were able to meet our users' needs, their desire to stay active, to advocate, but to do so using digital tools so that people can stay safe and still try to, deal with this unprecedented pandemic in their own way.
Absolutely. And that's actually made me think a little bit about some of the incredibly inspiring numbers that we actually, I don't think a lot of people have heard these, but incredibly inspiring numbers from our platform. I think we've been able to, do some analysis that shows us that we've had over 86 million petition signatures over this election period, more than 46,000 petitions created, and already more than 500 have been claimed as victories. And that's just that's incredible to think that this has been, there was a time, Charlie, you were talking about, getting this notice from your university and being told there's this crazy thing happening, you need to get out of your dorms. And to think that how much has happened over this election period, and still people will find a way to empower themselves and each other to create the change that they want to see around them. And I wanted to find out, thinking through these inspiring numbers, I'd love to hear a little bit about how, and I want to open this up to the panel. I'd love to hear a little bit about how each one of you have maybe engaged in some of that empowerment for yourself, and if there's an experience you'd like to share over this election period where you've engaged with advocacy work, and what that was, what it looked like, how it felt, just a little bit of that. And Ricky, do you want to kick us off on that maybe?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think one thing that really motivates me is local politics. I love the presidential election. I love studying the federal government, but where I like to put a lot of my energy is in local politics. And here in upstate and central New York, there's been a lot happening, obviously, with mutual aid in terms of COVID, but then also Governor Cuomo has tasked all the municipalities in New York State to rethink their police accountability. And so one thing I've been trying to do as an educator, and one thing that I think about as a professor and a citizen, is how can I work with people in my community to become smarter and better, and to gain more knowledge about what's going on. And particularly the discourse on police reform and police brutality in this country is so filtered and mitigated through the national political discourse that I find educational opportunities like what I've been doing with the group on campus and with local folks from the city, as well as the contingent of the Geneva Black Lives Matter, along with members of the NAACP and the city council, has been working towards what does policy look that allows us all to thrive. And so that's where I think a lot about an advocacy. And then on top of that, I think just the excitement from young people, both on campus and in the local community, about making change, about seeing possibilities from the city council to the White House to really affect what their future looks like is endlessly inspiring to me, and one of the reasons I wanted to teach.
That's all just sounds really incredibly, as you said, inspiring. And you mentioned young people. We've got our resident young person. Just joking, Charlie. But you were really busy over this election period. You've engaged in a lot of advocacy work with your group of friends. Fighting for voter freedom in Louisiana. Is there any particular moment or experience from that you'd like to pull out from all of that you'd like to share with us?
I mean, I think it's been a really special experience. We met with the Secretary of State to talk about how college students could more easily become poll workers, and really started giving the most bare bones information about that to our college leads across the state. And we're able to get tens of young people across the state to become poll workers that otherwise they would not have been. There was a poll worker shortage in Louisiana, or a projected poll worker shortage. And we really did our best to try to fill that. And we have close to 20 verified people that we got to become poll workers, which we think is really cool. It's not something that's sexy or that college students will want to do. But we think it's something that's really important, and something that this election couldn't happen without.
And that's really important work that you and your team were. I mean, I think historically we know that poll workers have usually been older people, and I think a lot of people have steered away from those positions because for fear of their own safety and health. And so I think you and other young people stepping in and taking on that really important role that hasn't previously been filled usually by the younger generation. So that's really incredible work that you and your team have been doing. Sylvia, I know you've been busy, but you've also seen a lot of stuff in the background that I'm sure has been just felt good, has also felt you've seen people empowering each other, and anything in particular that really stood out for you?
Well, I have been, this has been a year for me that it really feels like it's been the culmination of just years worth of folks really stopping, looking, seeing what's happening around them, and then making a decision. It's hey, is this the kind of change that I want to see, either in my community or my country, or do I want to see something different? And I think that lots of folks who would normally characterize themselves maybe as folks who just aren't that political, who just kind of think that politics are for someone else, I think that even those individuals, they now understand that politics, it's really all about how power works in your particular community. I mean, something that Professor Price just said that really resonated with me. He's not just focused on being, an educator and, working with and empowering his students. He's also talking about what he's doing as someone who is a resident in his community, someone who's a resident in his state, and he's also modeling what it looks like to be an active and engaged citizen. And then when I look at Charlie, and I see how Charlie could have made a different decision. Charlie and his friends, they could have been sent home from school in March and just kind of hung out and waited to see, well, when are we going to be able to resume our education? But instead, Charlie and his friends, they embarked on a project that was intended to help the people in his community, help the people in his state, and be able to speak to that issue very credibly because, this is a kid who lives and goes to school in Baton Rouge. He is just like any other person in Louisiana who simply wants to vote. And he's starting now modeling for other people, other classmates, what an active and engaged citizen looks like. And I mean, we have to do this because this is literally how we do it here in the United States. We were founded on that principle of self-governance. and we have to be educated, and we have to be aware, and we have to show up. Just to kind of close, local politics is also a super passion for me. Before I got my first big job in politics, I was just a nonprofit worker in Seattle, living in the greatest apartment of my life, had a beautiful rooftop garden, and I was growing tomatoes for the first time ever. I don't have a green thumb, but apparently everything grows in Seattle. And what changed my life was a commercial building going up next to my apartment building in such a way that that commercial building killed the light to that rooftop deck and destroyed my garden. And I was furious. I'm like, how could a commercial building do this? And I'm doing my research and I'm asking questions and I'm making angry inquiries. And that led me to my neighborhood association, where I started meeting people and started talking about our concerns in the community. And through that time with my neighborhood association, I learned how power worked in the city. And to this day, I can go back to my little part of West Seattle, and I can walk down the street and I can point to buildings where I and my neighbors, the neighborhood association, where we had a say in what that development looked like, where we had a say in how much parking would be out in front of that building, or that we had a say in that that building wouldn't be, taller than a certain level or whatever, that we wouldn't have too much traffic on our streets. And it was really just a group of neighbors who came together. But the most important thing we did is that we showed up. We were able to have influence because we showed up. Charlie is showing up. Professor Price is modeling to his students how you show up. Like, that is the core job of citizenship. And I feel like more Americans than in a very long time, they're showing up. They've been showing up. They're going to continue to show up on election day. And it is my deepest hope that they continue to show up long after election day has passed.
100%. And I mean, I love that, you sharing that story. Thank you for sharing about like how you actually, that feels like that introduction to you. And you're 100% right. And I think that's another reason why this election, it's a special election. It's a unique election for a lot of reasons, but Americans have shown up. They've shown up already. Before polls even opened today, millions of Americans have voted. States are reporting that 90% or even more of people who showed up in 2016 have already shown up to vote. So we already know that Americans are here, they're ready, they're showing up. And I guess like that leads me to my next question is, post-voting, post-showing up, what else could we be doing? Sylvia, you mentioned this amazing story about your apartment in Seattle. I'm sorry, I hope those tomatoes survived. But my question is kind of like around the use of petitions in this case. As you're part of the Change.org team, and I'd love also to, for Professor Price and Charlie to weigh in on this. But the biggest question we always get is, do petitions really work? And I understand that, especially in this like unique year where there are a lot of things we can't really do safely in terms of bringing lots of people together, but also being able to just connect people with similar interests, similar passions together through petitions. I mean, Sylvia, in this case with your Seattle apartment, do you think you guys would have been able to achieve that same kind of response to power through a petition? And, do you think that in our post-election world, petitions or perhaps even other methods of organizing, will those continue to be really important?
Yeah, then that's actually a really great question. I think that back in West Seattle, back in 2009, that a petition might have helped us reach our goals more quickly. Because for us back then, it was very much like an in-person thing. Like, I showed up, to the neighborhood association meetings and got to know people, or, we would make flyers and talk to people on the sidewalk in front of Starbucks about issues and try to get people to show up. But when you have a petition, you have a way of raising awareness about an issue and basically kind of bringing people together in an almost virtual way to lend their voice to your particular cause. You know, a lot of people, they know of change.org because they hear about the big petitions. You know, they hear about the petition, you know, Justice for Breonna Taylor, and it has 15 million signatures. And these are just really big things, things that become big national news, big cultural moments. But what people may not realize that it's really, I mean, what really powers change.org, it's millions of the smaller petitions, you know, the petitions to, you know, change the law around who gets to keep a pet pig, you know, in your neighborhood. Those are the petitions, or the petitions to preserve a wooden playground in Florida that's been around for 75 years and everyone in the community loves it. It ends up being these smaller petitions that where people are really, they're really engaged, really passionate, and they don't need to get millions of signatures. Sometimes your local official seeing that 500 people got together and signed a petition to preserve that local wooden playground, sometimes that's enough. One petition bringing together 500 neighborhood voices presented to one local decision maker made something happen. And those are the kinds of stories that we see every single day on change.org. Given that we don't know when we're going to return to normal, or even what our new normal is going to look like, my faith in digital tools like petitions, and even the other tools that we're offering with our petitions, you know, like our call tools and things, they will make activism easier and more sustainable in this era where it may be a while before people can do the types of in-person activism that we once did all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like it's a lot about like us revisioning like what that means to bring people together, what that kind of activism looks like in a slightly different world. And somewhat, you know, Charlie, you successfully did a lot of this in, you know, safely across Louisiana to, you know, huge success. And I think my most important question to you is like, what more do you think could have been done to support you and your group of friends? You know, it takes a lot, I think, to even just get kicked off for young people to say, this is something I want to do. It takes lots of time and energy. And, you know, is there more that could have been done to support you and your group of friends? Is there anything you think we could be doing as a society better to support younger generations of Americans who want to organize? Like, where did you feel that those gaps might have been missing in terms of support?
So I love petitions, and petitions are great, but petitions aren't the whole story. And petitions only work if like they have some backing behind them. So I know we had some very, very long Zoom calls over like those 6 months. We showed up we showed up to the legislator, testified. I think we testified like 6 times. And I'm lucky to be friends with a bunch of very civically engaged people. So we I think we did what we had to do to make sure that we were seen. I think one big thing that petitions do is they, especially as a college student, lend credibility to your cause almost. Like it's like, hey, it's not just me asking you, it's me and X amount of other people that also saw this. And if it not only like lends credibility, but it brings you exposure to when you finally do go out and like go do something at the state capitol, someone's already heard of like who you are and what you're doing, and like you don't have to like try to reinvent yourself every time. As for what we could do to better support people in that position, I think young people are too often like brushed aside, like, hey, you're just like, hey, that's just what the college students think. That's not actually like a valid like viewpoint. Like I think it's just like that the thinking is wrong. And young people oftentimes like have positions that are in line with the community. And I think people should just realize that more.
That's an incredibly important, you know, point to bring up, that, you know, we're doing younger people in America a massive disservice by not factoring them in as essential to these conversations, to this national narrative. And I loved what you mentioned about petitions being incredibly important, having a role, but they're also part of that story. They're one of our levers, and there are multiple ways for us to pull those things together to really like get the impact that we're wanting to get out of it. Professor Price, I really, as we're talking about, this election, the Americans really turning up to vote, all these different mechanisms of us addressing power and bringing people together to organize. As we reflect on this, especially today, what do you think might be one of our, what our biggest kind of threats to our democracy in the U.S. and maybe even the world? But I'd like us, because it's our election day today, it's an important one. Maybe we talk a little bit more specifically about right here now. What do you think our threats to democracy maybe are?
Absolutely. And we want to echo what Charlie and Sylvia were just saying about the way social change happens and the importance of young people. So because of that, young people are giving me a much greater faith in democracy and its potential stability or sustainability. I think one of the big things that I've been talking a lot with students as well as friends and family about is this anxiety and this feeling of, is there going to be a peaceful transition? Are our votes going to be counted? How is this all going to, and so the sort of groundlessness that we're amidst right now, along with larger trends globally of more nationalist politics and more xenophobic politics, not only in the US, but in places throughout the world. So fears of sort of is this the end of democracy, et cetera, et cetera. I think for me, the thing that helps to mitigate that is building trust in institutions and building trust in processes, right? And so I think about the work of Stacey Abrams between her race in 2018 to what we're seeing happen in Georgia right now with 800,000 people, more people registering, about the fact that it's a swing state for the first time since '92. So I think efforts like that actually give me tremendous faith in the ability of democracy, but that is not at all to say there are no threats. I think obviously any sort of hate-based ideologies, whether they manifest themselves in sort of the threats of militia groups that we've seen the past few weeks or threats of voter intimidation, right, absolutely need to be taken seriously, along with what we've known for years now about foreign interference. And so I think all of these things are threats, but I am cautiously optimistic in the way that the American people are, standing up for democracy in ways that maybe their politicians aren't.
Absolutely. And that really does speak to me that there is a lot kind of at stake. There are a lot of like various threats coming both domestically and internationally. But having you three brilliant people on this call, hearing about what Charlie's been up to and Professor Price, also in your own experience, I think there's a lot to be very hopeful for in terms of the strength of our democracy, the number of Americans showing up to vote, all incredibly heartening. And that, our focus of this conversation was that voting is incredibly important, but tomorrow's another day and the day after that's another day. And there are just all these continued opportunities for us to take action. And so I just wanted to find out what does tomorrow or the next day kind of look like for you guys? Are there going to be any particular actions that you have in mind? And I want to start with you, Sylvia. Is there anything that you plan on doing tomorrow and the coming weeks that you'd like to share with us?
Well, my all of my time is absorbed with Democracy Desk. So what my tomorrow looks like, it depends on what happens in our country tonight. But moreover, it depends on how our active and engaged citizenry response to what either happens tonight or early tomorrow. That's the great thing about being at Change.org. I mean, we're here to support our US users, our average everyday people. We're here to respond to their needs and support them in the change that they want to make. But for me, personally, because we are operating in this pandemic election, and because There are so many interesting races happening, particularly like with ballot initiatives, that I'm really interested to see what happens with those particular ballot initiatives. There are lots of races up and down the ballot. Being an old campaign hand, this, like I said, it's Christmas, so I want to see if I get all of my gifts. That's what I'm focused on. But I also recognize, as everyone should recognize, that especially if elections are close, sometimes it takes time. It's going to take time to count those ballots. It's going to take time to count all the ballots so that we can see what the actual result of the particular, election race is. And so that's where a lot of my attention is going to be tonight and in the coming days. I want to see how these things play out. And I'm also going to want to model the same calm and confidence in our processes and our institutions that Professor Price was talking about. That's key to making sure that this democracy continues to grow. And yeah, I'm really excited. I'm excited about this time. Today is a good day. Anytime people are out there making their voices heard is a wonderful occasion. So I'm just going to keep that same hopeful, optimistic attitude going through tomorrow and beyond.
I love that. Thank you. And Charlie, you mentioned that you're part of a group, you and your group of friends, incredibly civic minded, have been really involved in a lot of pre-election work in Louisiana. Is there anything you guys are keeping an eye out for, and any kind of actions you might have planned for the next coming days?
I mean, I think we're all gonna sit and figure out what happens tonight and tomorrow, and figure out like what the election result is, and really work toward the next election in Louisiana and making sure that it's as accessible as possible. As has been mentioned on this call many times, we don't know when we're going to go back to normal. And we have lots of elections in Louisiana for some reason. So just like making sure that there are no shenanigans and that everyone gets to have their voice heard is, I think, what we'll be focusing on in the next coming days.
Amazing, and definitely like grateful to have you there in Louisiana, making sure that you're fighting for voting rights, not just for this big election, but like, as you're saying, there's like a lot of local elections, and it's really important to make sure that accessibility and just the right to vote and people being heard, that's incredibly important. Thank you for that, Charlie. Professor Price, what are you planning for tomorrow, the coming weeks? Anything you're kind of keeping an eye out for, or any actions you might have in mind that you think you might want to roll out?
I mean, definitely, I relate very much to what Sylvia was saying, and that for political scientists, it's like so we get so much data, and we can start trying to figure out what's been happening, right? So I'm very excited to start seeing the returns and seeing how everything happens, and just starting to move beyond conjecture, right? And so what is actually happening. So I'm very excited about that. And then the first Wednesday of the month is city council meeting. So starting right up with that tomorrow, right? And hopefully trying to motivate folks in the community and on campus to use the energy of the election to come to city council, to start going to those meetings, right? Did you, if you had some passion and energy about what was happening in this election, just like what Sylvia was saying, come join the neighborhood association and see what sort of good trouble you can cause.
I love it. I love that you're jumping right back into, the local politics and getting involved, making sure that it doesn't end right here. This is the big one, but it doesn't end here. We've got to take it back home to our communities. I know for me, my mantra at the moment is, Leo waited 22 years for the Oscar. We can wait to count all the votes. So that's what I'm focusing on is counting them. There are a lot of things that are better when you wait. You got to let those pizza rolls cool down. Those are better when you wait. Waiting to count all the votes is also pretty important too. Yeah, I'd love you guys to just like unmute for a second. I'd love to say goodbye. Thank you all for your time. I know it's been like a short, but I feel like we've gotten a lot in this really short call. I appreciate you all making the time, and I just appreciate all that you all are doing in your local communities to empower people, to make sure that like voting is, voting rights are important, and local governments are important. And yeah, just grateful for all of you for being here. So thank you so much, Professor Price, Charlie, Sylvia.
Thank you so much. This has been
Thank
so lovely, really lovely to talk with you all. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.